Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire more people to grow their own food, which is exactly what I'm doing here in my garden and on my allotment. Now, this week, I can't believe it, we're in September already. So we have got the seed of the month. I've also got a few seeds that we're going to be sowing this month. Added to that, I've also had a question come in from a listener about my houseplants. So we're going to be going through my edible houseplants. So that's all coming up. So let's go outside and start the seed sowing. Well, I'm out in my garden now. It is a little bit wet tonight, but nothing to really worry about. But I'm out here because it's time to sow seeds for our seed of the month. Now, this is a feature that we started a few months ago in collaboration with Premier Seeds. Premier Seeds are an online seed seller. They sell pretty much every type of veg seed you could ever want. Not only veg seeds, they also do flower seeds as well. Please do go check them out. Herb seeds, you name it, they've probably got it. But better than that, their prices are incredibly reasonable, and the size of the packs that you get for the money are incredibly generous as well. Honestly, I think they are one of the best value suppliers in the country. Now, this month they have chosen an onion seed, and it's a variety called Alisa Craig. This is a variety that's really good for exhibition onions, but also really tasty in the kitchen. It's a white onion, so it's your standard onion variety, and they cook really well. They taste great. Fantastic choice of onion. Now, the packet is 6 grams, which is quite a lot of seeds. And it costs £1.19 for the pack at the time of recording. It could, of course, change, but 6 grams, trust me, hundreds and hundreds of onions you could get out of this. But added to that, we do have the discount code as well. The discount code is PSD VegPont, which will give you 10% off. That code is, of course, in the show notes for this episode. Now, I am sowing this in September, which you might think seems a little early to you, especially if you grow onions from seed when you sow them in the winter. But I do like to grow overwintered onions. It gives me the feeling that my allotment and my garden are doing something and growing food over winter. And usually I would grow my overwintered onions from sets. Now, sets are young, immature onions. Premier Seeds actually do sets as well, so if you are looking at getting sets, do go check them out. But what I'm doing this year is growing these from seed. Now, growing from seed does involve a little bit more work. First of all, we've got to start the seeds off a little bit earlier, hence why I'm sowing them now. But not only that, we would need to prick them out, pot them on before we finally get them planted out. With sets, they can just go straight in the ground. But the advantage of using seeds, one, of course, they are cheaper and you get more for your money. But two, they are less likely to bolt, which is a good thing. Overwintered onions do have a habit of bolting. Because they are ready much earlier, they get stressed much easier. They do have a habit of bolting. So by growing from seed, less chance of them going to seed. Now, the other advantage with these seeds that has been selected, and as I said, there's 6 grams worth of seeds, which is a lot. We can sow some of these seeds now, but we can also sow some in the winter, usually around Christmas time or even into January, which can then be planted out in the spring as well. So we get the early overwintered onions, and we also get our normal main crop onions, which are much better for storage. Now, these seeds are incredibly versatile for this reason. And another thing I should point out, onion seeds are not very good for storage. They only really last a year before they lose any of their vigour. So it's well worth using them up in the first year. Now, anyway, sowing these seeds, what I've done is I've filled up my plug plant trainers with seed compost. And I've just sown 1 seed per each plug plant. Now, they can be sown directly where they are to grow in a drill about 0.5 centimetre deep and then thinned out as they grow. But added to that, these can also be sown in seed trays and in pricked out as well. Same sort of thing, fill up a seed tray with seed compost, sow the seeds and cover them with about 1/2 centimetre of seed compost and wait for germination, which can take about 2 weeks, and then you want to prick them out. Now the reason I'm going for plug plants is it just helps me avoid that pricking out stage, which is one of the jobs I really hate. Just such a monotonous job pricking out, so I sooner try and get them in plug plants, then I can just get them as soon as they germinate and start to grow. We can then get them into pots and get them growing a little bit quicker. Now I do find germination is under 2 weeks, and these plants, the growth will be slow at first, but as they get more and more space, they do tend to grow larger and quicker. And once they are large enough to be planted out, that's when I will plant them out. Normally I'm looking for the thickness of a pencil when I plant them out. Now in preparation for planting out, what I'm going to do is, of course, where they are going to be planted out in the ground, I've got to clear all the weeds and add some blood, fish and bone and give it a good rake in and get some nice fertile soil. Plant them out when the time is right, which will be in mid-autumn, I would imagine, and just give them a good watering in and check on them regularly to make sure birds don't pull them out. We might have to put some netting over if that becomes a problem. Generally speaking, it's not too much of a problem, but it's just something we need to keep an eye on. Over winter, they generally don't need much watering, but if we get a dry spell, that's when they might need a bit of watering. And of course, as we get into the spring and the rainfall becomes less and less, that's also when we need to increase the amount of watering. In terms of feeding, high nitrogen feeds such as chicken manure pellets every few weeks will do them a world of good. Again, over winter, not so much because they don't grow a huge amount in the depths of winter. It's when you get into the warmer weather, January, February next year, when they really start to put on some growth. Now, as I said, the advantage of growing these over winter is that they provide us with crops earlier. And what I will find is that by the time we get into the middle of the year, around the summer solstice, about end of June, beginning of July, the tops go brown, and that's when we harvest them. And I get them all out of the ground. I put them in the greenhouse for a couple of weeks just to harden up the skins, dry them out, and there we go. We've got these onions. Now, if we've sown these in the winter, like our normal ones, and we plant them out in spring, we don't harvest them until sort of August. In fact, I haven't even harvested my main crop onions this year. Here at home or on the allotment, they're still growing. So really, they're incredibly easy to grow, these onions, especially from seed, but they are a staple. They are something that I believe everybody should be growing. I worked out that we go through 300 onions a year, so we need to grow lots of them in order to make up for all our needs. Right, it is time to find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week, and I'm going to head on into the shed to find out what other seeds we can sow throughout September. Well, I hope you're enjoying this podcast so far. If you are, then please consider leaving a rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds to leave a rate and review, but it really does help us out and gets the algorithms working and get us discovered by more people. Plus, it gives me some really valuable insights into what you guys are looking forward to listening to. Added to that, if you're also enjoying this podcast, then please consider becoming a member of our Supporters Club. Our Supporters Club is set up to keep this podcast running, but also help more people grow their own food. For just £5 a month, you get extra behind-the-scenes podcasts. You also get once a month a seed pack delivered to your address, and these seeds can be sown in that very month. And in the pack is also our mini newspaper, which gives you a few ideas of what to do that month. And all that is just £5 a month. You can find more out at the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Now, over this last week, we've actually sown all the seeds for August, so it's been very much about getting ready for September and all the tasks that we're going to be doing in September, and also what seeds are being sent out. 6 seeds this month, And there's some good ones, I've got to say. We've got cabbage, coriander, spring onions, mustard, radish and lettuce in the pack for September. All that is just £5 a month. If you want to find out more, head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Well, I'm in my shed now and I'm going through my seed boxes just to see what we can grow this month. September is a funny month, I think, especially when it comes to seed sowing. People often think that, well, we can only really sow the seeds at the beginning of the year. They grow all year and then we have nothing in the winter. But actually, I believe gardening and growing your own particularly is all about thinking ahead. And any of the seeds that we can sow now are going to keep providing us with food into the winter and even into the spring. Now, some of the ones that I'm definitely going to be sowing this month are my spring cabbages, my spring cauliflowers. These are essential in my opinion. We've done really well with brassicas this year, and I want to keep that going. So sowing these seeds now will give us those cabbages in the spring, right as we're in that hunger gap when there's little available. Now we do need to use the correct varieties, however. These are spring varieties, Durham Early for example, for cabbages. So do check your packets and just make sure they are a spring cabbage. One of the other advantages that I have with growing certain spring cabbages is that I actually plant these a little closer than I would normally do. And the reason for that is that as they grow, we're going to thin them out in the spring, and we're going to use those thinnings as a spring green. So we're actually getting two crops from the one, which just makes life a little bit easier, plus gives us some more food. Now, sticking with the brassicas, there's quite a few root crops that we could sow. Turnip, kohlrabi, radish, for example. These are all quick growing crops. We've actually harvested some turnips this week, absolutely delicious. And I really recommend that we get those sown. Now, if you've got any empty spaces, you might want to sow those directly into the ground. That's turnip, kohlrabi, radish. Kale is another brassica that we can sow now. Now, these aren't going to be strong enough. They're not going to have enough growing time to get through the winter. So we're going to be using these more like a cut and come again salad leaf, but it just gives us the option to have more food. We could also sow some varieties of peas this month. Now these are going to be a quick variety of peas, and we sow those so that we can just squeeze in a last sowing. Not necessarily overwintering, although we will be doing overwintering peas later on in the year. Now, root crops, I've already mentioned some of the root crops that we will be growing, but moving on with others. Carrots, quick growing carrots, early carrots, we can still squeeze in some sowings of those, and the short stumpy carrots as well. They generally are quite quick, and certainly ones that we could fit in the ground. Beetroot as well. Now these are only going to be baby beetroots and not really going to achieve their full size, but again we want a quick or early varieties of those. We could do broad beans for overwintering. I normally do those October, November, but we could start them off now just to get some extra early broad beans. And broad beans are pretty good in the garden, I've got to say. Added to that, being a legume and overwintering and hardy, they're going to fix nitrogen in the soil as well. So you've got an added advantage for that. Now moving on from that, we've got a lot of our salady crops that we could be sowing as well. Spring onions, lettuce, although we want the winter varieties of lettuce. Mizuna and mustards, the great ones to sow as well, and I quite like growing those too. Asian greens as well, they're another good type of seed that we could sow, and many others that we have here. Pak choy, I love growing pak choy, and we use pak choy quite often in green Thai curry, which is a great dish to have in the winter. So that's definitely another seed that we are going to be sowing. Oh, and don't forget spinach. Now, spinach is a cool, loving crop, so it does like the cooler parts of the year. I do find that we made a sowing of spinach in June, July time, and that bolted really quickly. But if we sow it now, it's less likely to bolt unless we suddenly get a heat wave. And spinach can actually grow right throughout the winter as well. So that's definitely one that I will be sowing. Now, of course, let's not forget the herbs, which I always think are probably one of the most important things to go. Parsley and coriander, again, cool weather loving crops, so they will be fine outside or even under a bit of protection, and we can sow those directly outside in the ground where we want those to grow. But also things like basil and dill. Now, these do like a bit more warmth, so they may not do so well when it gets cold, but we can sow those indoors. We can grow them outside on warm days, but keep them indoors just to provide us with some herbs on the kitchen windowsill as and when we need them. So there's quite a few seeds that we can really sow. Yes, our choices are getting more and more limited, but there are lots that we could sow. Again, Premier Seeds Direct. If you haven't got any of these seeds, go check them out with our discount code, as I said earlier. Right, it's time for Chef Scott's recipe of the week, and I'm going to meet you back inside my kitchen because I've had a question from a listener.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Hi, it's Scott here, and over the past 6 months, I've been contemplating taking on a third allotment next to my existing plots and creating an orchard on it. And according to our allotment rules, we are allowed 6 trees per plot. But I want to see if I can have all 18 trees on the one plot. And because all my allotments are next to each other and they're fenced off as one, I'm hoping it won't be a problem. And the idea is it will be an orchard and wildflower meadow, with all the fruit trees being heritage varieties. So, for a bit of research, I recently visited a local orchard that grows over 100 varieties of orchard fruit. And while I was there, I couldn't resist picking up some of that fruit, which brings us on to this week's recipe, a plum and almond crumble, a simple but delicious dessert where the hardest part about it is deciding whether to have custard, cream or ice cream with it. So, let's head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the Veg Grower Podcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, Seed to Table Plot 13. For this recipe, you will need, for the crumble topping, 130 grams of plain flour, 75 grams of oats, 30 grams of caster sugar, 30 grams of ground almonds, and 20 grams of flaked almonds. This is optional. And for the crumble filling, 600 grams of plums, 1 star anise, 20 grams of caster sugar, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Method: make the crumble topping by adding all the crumble topping ingredients to a mixing bowl apart from the flaked almonds and rub everything together with your hands until it resembles breadcrumbs. Now make the filling by cutting the plums into quarters, removing the stones, and then mixing with the sugar and vanilla. Now place the plums into an oven-proof dish and sprinkle with the crumble topping and flaked almonds, and bake in a preheated oven set at 180 degrees Celsius for 35 to 45 minutes. And that's the recipe done. And that's it from me this week.
Now, I'm back in the kitchen again this week, which is a little bit surprising. I don't normally like to do this place more than once every now and then. The reason that I'm back in here is because we had a comment or feedback on Spotify, and it came from Gabriella. And the comment was, it was so relaxing to listen to this, gathered so much information. Would love to learn more about indoor plants. And I mentioned my indoor plants last week. So I thought I would this week just go into a bit more detail about my indoor plants. Now, as I've always said, my emphasis has always been on edible plants. I only really grow edibles. And that is something that I am really, really strict with myself for doing. And that rolls on into our indoor plants. Of course, I've got my seed sowing station in here, which is indoors. So you could technically say all my indoor plants include seedlings. But no, we're talking about actual house plants, or plants that I treat like house plants. Now, some of you, if you've listened to this for any length of time, you will know some of the ones that I'm going to include. And that's, of course, my ginger, my turmeric and my cardamom. I've been growing these for a number of years. And actually, what we're now starting to do is split them up to get more plants. Now, this is easy with our gingers and our turmeric. What I've discovered is that when we harvest these plants, when they die back down in the winter, we actually are able to split the bits of ginger off and able to plant up other bits in order to get more plants. This year, for example, I've got 3 ginger plants growing and they're producing quite well, 2 of which are of course in my tin cans that we made a few weeks ago. Now, I'm hoping that this year when we harvest our ginger, we're going to try and get some more of that. All I will do is split the ginger. I keep what I want. I want to try and keep the bits of ginger root that are a slightly different colour. They got more of a purple white bit because that's likely where growth is going to happen. Those are the bits I'm going to replant. And I replant those straight away, put them in just multi-purpose compost, nothing difficult, and keep them inside. They will do nothing all winter, and then come spring they will bounce back into life. And it's very much the same with my turmeric, grown in exactly the same way, and we get more and more plants. The trouble with both of these, turmeric's not so much because you don't exactly grow or eat a lot of turmeric in this country, but ginger we do eat quite a bit of, and trying to be self-sufficient in it, I think we would end up with lots and lots of plants that my entire kitchen windowsill, front room windowsill, many other windowsills would just be full up with ginger. I'm not saying it's not possible, but with the amount of ginger we would need, it would take quite a few plants. Now, my cardamom plant, that is an interesting plant overall. It's an evergreen, so it's always in leaf. It stays every year. I've actually got to split it, so I'm just going to split it up into 4 little plants because the pot's just getting so congested. All I'm going to do is take it out of the plot, use a sharp spade and just split the root ball into 4 parts and then plant each of those up. Now, cardamom does like a more humid environment. It actually does much better in a bathroom that is well lit. So if you are looking at growing cardamom, that's something you might want to look at. Now, in terms of actually getting cardamom pods, I have not been able to get any cardamom pods out of it. But the leaves themselves are actually edible, and we use those in some dishes instead. So although it's not producing what we really want, it is giving us an edible element to it. Now, moving on from that is one plant that I gained this year. It's completely new to me. It's a vanilla orchid. The idea being that we're going to grow our own vanilla pods. Now, I've spent this weekend, funny enough, watching lots of videos on how to grow vanilla. And vanilla itself is a tropical plant. It's an orchid, so it grows in rainforests and really hot environments. So it's definitely going to be an indoor plant. My worry is over the winter we don't necessarily have our heating on, and our house can get a little chilly. We're a bit tight like that. So it's something I'm going to have to keep a very, very close eye on. It's also going to take about 5 years before we finally get any vanilla beans from it. But it's a really exciting plant. It's a climber, of course, and I've been really watching it closely just to see how well it's doing. And I've got to say, since brought it this year back at Gardeners World Live, it's pulled on some growth. I've had to repot it, and I've also had to add in a stick for it to climb up. I've gone for a orchid stick, as it's called. And I'm really impressed with it. I really do like how it looks. It's going to look even better when I finally get it up to full growth, because it's going to need to go into eventually a bigger pot, and I believe it can grow up to 4 meters tall. So it's going to be quite an impressive orchid. My plan is to grow it in a bedroom, have it growing up a wooden bookshelf along the top of our ceiling as well. Should be fun. It's a climber, so it's trying to climb up trees, hence why I'm sticking with wood. Now, of course, orchids can be quite difficult to look after. People tend to overwater them, so I've been quite good with that. I water from the bottom and just let it suck up any water, and it will work its own way out. I've not really got much experience on how to grow vanilla, only what I've been watching, but I'm also looking at taking cuttings in the not too distant future as well, in order to increase the amount of vanilla plants that I got from it. This plant was one of the most expensive plants I've ever bought. It was something like £30, and normally I would balk at that sort of price, but I went for it, and I'm very, very happy with it. Now, all these plants that I've mentioned, I've had feedback from some other listeners who also grow, particularly the ginger and the turmeric. One of my listeners contacted me and said that she grows ginger and turmeric in storm lanterns, which look great, but also add their own sort of greenhouse effect as well. As I said, all these plants are tropic plants, which is why I treat them like they are houseplants. Now, something else I'm going to throw in is something that I mentioned in the earlier section: herbs growing on our kitchen windowsill, especially throughout the winter. Would they technically be a houseplant? Well, they're grown indoors, so I think they are. Things like basil and dill, which do like it quite warm, they are going to be growing indoors over winter, as will our microgreens and things like that as well, sticking with the whole houseplants. Whether that's quite what Gabrielle meant by houseplants, I don't know, but they're just another thing I'm going to throw in there. In fact, I've also got my hydroponic system that I've been experimenting with this year, and that's proving to be quite a good addition to our houseplant growing. But on a whole, our houseplants consist of our tropical edible plants, and I'm trying to think of any other tropical edible plants that we can continue to grow indoors. Now, I do grow citrus trees, oranges and lemons, which people might treat like a houseplant. In fact, they could grow quite happily in a conservatory as well. I grow mine outside in a greenhouse, but I don't really get the very cold temperatures. I visited a citrus nursery a few months back, and they said they can cope with temperatures down to about -5, which is very rare I reach that temperature here. But further up north in the country, of course, there might be colder temperatures like that. So citrus plants are definitely one that I do like to grow. And I think they also make another very attractive houseplant, especially in a conservatory or something like that. Now, if you've got any more edible houseplants that you would like to share with me, please do feel free to get in touch. My email address, of course, richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. And now it's time for Lee's last tip for the summer holidays. So, Lee, over to you, my friend.
Hello there, dear listener. It is I, Lee Connolly, the Ski and Gene Gardener, and I feel a little bit sad because we are on the final week of me being on the Veg Grower Podcast for a little bit, let's be honest, and of the 6 weeks holiday. And I hope you have enjoyed the allotment with the children throughout this holiday. Maybe you did put that goal at the end of the rainbow and you have achieved it this holidays. But as it does heat up at the end of the holidays, I think it's only right to talk about saving water, because when it does rain, that water is precious, and we need to think about it, whether you've got a water butt down at the allotment or not. One of our schools that are part of our gardening competition have come up with a great idea to save water and make sure our plants are well watered. All they've done is got a plastic bottle, they've put some holes in it in the sides, and then they've put a sponge in there, just like a flannel almost, into the bottle. Basically, when it rains or when you pour water into it, that sponge absorbs the water and then very slowly seeps out throughout time. And if you've got that planted next to a tomato plant or any of your plants out on the allotment, it means that when you're not there, your plants are still getting water. So there you go. There's my 6 weeks with the Skinny Jean Gardener on the Veg Grower Podcast over. I hope you've enjoyed it, and make sure you tell me what you got up to down at the allotment.
Well, thank you very much to both Scott and Lee for their contributions this week. And Lee, thank you so much for your tips throughout the summer holidays. Well, it is time to wrap this podcast up. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's certainly been a lot of fun pulling it together. Now, if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please do rate and review on your podcast provider. As I said, it only takes you a few seconds to leave a rate and review, but it really, really does help us out. We've already had Gabriella's review on Spotify, but Lynn, as always, has left us another review. She said, "Hi Richard, I've been thinking about giving nematodes a go a lot recently. The damage slugs have done this year has been horrendous. Planning to try them in the autumn and again in the spring, though I know it needs to be used on moist soil, and where I live in Norfolk, we haven't had rain for so long." Also checked out GrowMad website, which I've never heard of before. Thought it was really useful. Thanks for that, Lynn. Thank you so much once again, Lynn. I'm glad that it has been useful for you. Now, we also had a review from an episode about a month ago, and that was from Carol, who said, "Really enjoyed my first listen. Pointed your way by the simple things. We'll keep in touch." Please do keep in touch, Carol. It's always good to hear some feedback. Also, the simple things. I'm trying to find out how they pointed you my way. If you could share me a little bit of information on that, that would be great. Please do rate and review. It really does help us out massively. Now, if you want to support this podcast, help keep it running, then please consider it becoming a member of our supporters club. It really does help us out in a big way. It really does help keep the website and everything that this podcast needs funding for. It helps with that. Details on that at the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. And while you're on our website, you can of course leave us a voicemail using our SpeakPipe service, or leave a comment on the bottom of a blog post. Added to that, if you do want to get in touch, you can email me, richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, or you can find us on social media, and you can also contact me through social media as well. In fact, Tom contacted me this week and said, "Hi Richard, I just wanted to send a message to say I've been really enjoying your new book club feature on the podcast. I also have ADHD and I find audiobooks much more accessible to me, and I can listen to them at work and while driving, which is an added bonus. Hence why I love podcasts, my friend." I don't know if you're aware, but the library service has an app called Borrow Books, which allows you to loan audiobooks and ebooks for free. Perhaps it's something you might consider looking into, or maybe even mentioning on your podcast for others to enjoy. Highly recommend Soil by Matthew Evans. It's a fascinating insight into what's going on under our feet, the damages we've done, and how we can be better stewards of our soil. Happy growing. Thank you very much for Tom. I've shared that with everyone. I've checked out Borrow Box myself, and I'm definitely becoming a fan. Right, it's time to wrap this podcast up. We will be back again next time. Next time it's actually the Autopot special. Autopot is a fantastic equipment I've been testing this year, and I'm really excited to share next week's episode with you. We will be back then, so until then, please take care.